Welcome to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. I am your host, Chad Hufford, and this is the podcast where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the working world. Each week, we dive into the incredible stories of honest, hardworking folks who have found financial success through grit, determination, and good old-fashioned elbow grease. So if you're ready to be inspired and learn how to turn your hard work into your own success story, you're in the right place. This is the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. All right, well, we are back with another episode of the Blue Collar Millionaire Show, and I am here with Chris Tacci, who is not only one of my very first clients, but a longtime friend and one of the most generous people that I've ever met. And him and his wife, Kathleen, raised 4 kids, homeschooled all of them. He served at our church, very active in the community. And he and his wife, after 40 years at Pepsi, Chris recently retired to go down and help his wife's family. And just always has been an example of a servant and a servant's heart, and somebody who has let the blessings in his life flow through him, not just to him, without talking about too much because he's going to get uncomfortable with me bragging about him. But Chris, you did a lot of the little things that most people weren't willing to do. Most people aren't willing to do. And you didn't make excuses. And it just, you have, ever since I've known you, you have been a picture of God's principles from Proverbs, and how you've managed money and how you viewed money, not just managing it for yourself, but using it as a blessing for other people. When did that start for you?
Wow. When did it start? Well, I think I picked up on principles from my grandparents, who were 3 out of the 4 were immigrants to the United States. So my one grandfather was a barber. I used to sit in the barber chair, seemed like every other week. And he would say things to me like, your generation walks around with 99 cents in their pocket and thinks they have $1. Your generation steps over a penny. My generation will pick it up. And the other thing he said to me is stuck in my mind is, a steady drip puts a hole in the rock. Now, I didn't know what all that meant back then, but as I grew older, I started getting the picture that somehow I guess I just gleaned things from my grandparents. And then I had 2 uncles who were instrumental in my life, telling me to start investing.
So those seeds were planted very, very early, like even as a kid.
Yes.
Got you thinking about those things. When did you first start saving for the future?
Probably when I was a young person. My dad made a comment once to his buddies. He said, my son, my third-born son, can make $35, but he goes to the bank with 38. Somehow I would find $3 extra to start saving, because I was always wanting, I didn't want to blow my money. My older brother would live for the moment and then didn't have anything. And I always thought about saving everything. So your fault.
So your older brother was normal. I mean, that's most people. But one thing that's always stuck out with you though is, and I know it's probably been a little bit of a struggle, but not only did you always find a way to save, but I've also seen you be very generous. And some people can go from being frugal to being misers, where instead of them controlling their money still controls them. It might not be debt, but they're so consumed by it that they can't enjoy it. And something that you might not even remember this, Chris, but years and years ago, you were taking me home from a friend's house because my parents were out of town, and you were probably 30. You're just a young pup yourself. But I thought you were this wise old man, sage, and you're talking about how little habits make such a huge difference. And you were driving up the hill to Stuckagan, and you grabbed a piece of trash that was sitting in your car somewhere, and motioned like you were going to throw it out the window. And it kind of shocked me. And you weren't trying to shock me. You mentioned that it's so easy to just litter in the street and not think it's a big deal, but how it causes a habit and creates waste and other bad habits in your life, and just can be very destructive. And you probably don't even remember that, but that stands out in my mind. I mean, it made an impact on me. 30 years later, I still remember it.
Wow.
How those little things add up. And you mentioned a few minutes before we started recording, your first job, your first official pay, you're making $3 an hour.
Yes.
Drying apricots.
Working on an apricot machine.
Okay, on an apricot machine. Okay.
Cut the cots. Yeah.
$3 an hour.
Yeah, I tripled my income from the year before when I was making $1 an hour.
And you were kind of off the books, under the table, making $1 an hour, and still thinking you were doing all right.
No, I was paying taxes on that.
Were you really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had to have a work permit.
No kidding.
And a
Okay.
Social Security number. No, I paid taxes on that.
Don't worry. Even if you didn't, we're statute of limitations. I think you're good. But
no.
So one of the things that a lot of people will make an excuse on is, I don't make enough money. I don't make enough money to save. And this goes back to this idea of habits, because I think if somebody is waiting for that promotion, that job, that windfall, there's always going to be something to wait for. I'll start saving. I'll start providing for my future when X, Y, Z happens. But Chris, you made a point early in your career. You're just going to start saving. You never made 6 figures any year during your career.
No.
40 years working the same job as a truck driver.
Oh yeah. No way. No way.
And a lot of it wasn't even that close.
In the beginning, I was making $8 an hour. And the goal was, at the time, $16 an hour is what the going rate was. But I was making half of what everyone else was because I was considered temporary. But when I became full-time, then my wages would increase in increments. And it took about a year, I think, to get up to full scale. Prior to that, I still was saving. My bride and I, Kathleen, we married in 1984, and I just said, hey, let's live off what I make and let's save what you make. And she was on board with that. And I want to say right away, before I forget, that without Kathleen's help and support and being a great team player, if you will, she helped us get where we're at today. I mean, I couldn't do this by myself. I had people speaking into your dad was one who kind of helped me along to think things through. Back when 401k came about, I had no clue, and I wasn't even going to participate in it because I was like, I don't want someone else saving my money. I'll save my own money. I don't need somebody ripping me off, is what I thought. But my uncle, he kind of kicked me in the rear and said, you get in that, and you get in it now. And so I listened to him, and I did join up, but I had 3 options: high risk, medium risk, and guaranteed fund. And this is where your dad came in. So I was in guaranteed fund because I didn't want to risk my savings, thinking that guaranteed meant it was guaranteed. But I found out later it was just bonds, 100% bonds. So one day I looked at my statement after being in the program for some years, lots of years. I had $100,000 in my 401k, and I was so excited and proud. I think it was in the late 90s by then. And I showed it to your dad, and I said, hey, Steve, you want to look at and your dad shook his head, and he said, Chris, you could have had 3 times this amount. Why are you in bonds? And I didn't even know what bonds were. I had no clue. All I knew is it said guaranteed fund. And your dad told me that's a misnomer. Nothing's guaranteed. And I said, all right. I just threw my hands up. I didn't know what to do. I said, what do you recommend? He said, just bring me what you're allowed to invest in, because it was very limited.
Yeah, you have a handful of choices.
Exactly. When you're in a company. So I showed your dad. He said, just do this percentage here, here, and here. The next day, and I'm a procrastinator, and I thank God I didn't procrastinate. The next day I called back then, whoever was handling it, Fidelity, I think, and I told him I want these percentages. In 90 days, I got my next statement, and I had $118,000, and I was just walking on cloud 9. I called your dad and I thanked him. I said, Steve, thank you so much. I can't believe it. $18,000 in 90 days. That's $6,000 a month. That's more than I make working. And your dad said, Chris, hold it. Hold it. Don't thank me. It could have easily went the other way. You're not retiring tomorrow. You're retiring in the future. So don't thank me. Just stay steady and don't look at those. He said, just keep plugging along. And
well, it's good advice for so many different reasons. And what you alluded to is important. This idea of fixed income gets a lot of people bent out of shape because they latch onto guarantees. And human beings, we like guarantees. We like certainty. But the problem with a fixed income in a rising cost world, when you phrase it like that, is pretty obvious. Fixed income, as costs increase, sets you further and further behind.
Exactly.
But it's comfortable in the moment. But the other thing too is how difficult it is to keep a long-term perspective when somebody's focused on the short term. And I know that you were excited in that, but since then you've also had to weather a lot of storms. Oh, yeah. And I wasn't even going to talk about this today, but when you came in, you brought a newsletter from March of 2008, which is when you and I started working together professionally. And the market proceeded to decline and decline and decline. And then when we thought it couldn't go down anymore, it did. Mm-hmm. So 2008, 2009, it was a bloodbath financially. But I think those lessons that you'd been through some of this before. And I remember some of those conversations, and it was not easy, but you stayed with it and you stayed consistent. And that's a huge part of your success. I mean, God's blessed you immensely. I love what you said about Kathleen. I mean, you didn't say it exactly like this, but finance is a team sport. You got to have your wife, your spouse, even family members around you can be huge because it is so difficult. But this was not an easy path. I mean, you chipped away. Kind of that drip of water will eventually make a hole in a rock. Yeah. I mean, that really is your story. There wasn't any one moment, this huge breakthrough. It was just a chipping away, gradually eroding away at the obstacles in your path for a long period of time. But the financial storms, they came and went. And I think one of the things that allowed you to do what you did, weather those storms, to be able to raise 4 kids, single income household, to be able to homeschool all of them, was your ability to avoid debt. Because you didn't have that risk profile that a lot of people carry along with them. How important was getting debt out of your pathway?
It was on the highest priority. I hate debt because I bought a condominium back in 1983 here in Anchorage, Alaska, and I was paying 10.5% interest on that loan. And it was like I was never going to get this thing paid off because I had asked for something called an amortization schedule. And back in those days, the bank would send you it on a printout. And I had a 15-year note. And I was paying like $10,000 a year in interest and barely a few $100s in principal. And when I started seeing if I just prepay some of those years in the principal amount, I could erase a lot of that interest. And so I started listening. Let me back up for a second. I had another uncle who was teaching me about OPM, other people's money. He says, borrow money from the bank, make an investment in real estate, and then you'll turn around, make a profit, and then keep doing that again, pay off your loan. And I tried that. But I'll just sum it up this way. Every time I bought real estate, I bought high and I sold low. I didn't do well with real estate. So I started listening to a guy named Larry Burkett.
Well, just real quick, before you go onto that, you mentioned something. So you bought real estate in the 80s. And the first part of the 80s was really hot, especially up here in Alaska.
Yes.
But you mentioned something about your bank closing. So we hear about people foreclosing on loans, but your bank shut down. That's how scary things got.
Yes. this is where I was going to go with this 10.5%. No, that's fine. I'm paying 10.5% interest on a condominium that I borrowed $79,000 on, and not making any dent into this. Almost. It was 1985, 86. And by 87, my condo was worth $39,000. I couldn't refinance. I was upside down. Nobody would lend me, refi me, because interest rates were starting to come down to like 7.5%. And I started learning that's a good thing as interest comes down. So I'm upside down. I'm frustrated. I was borrowing money at 18, 19 years old, buying raw land in Alaska, flying property. I didn't own a plane. What was I thinking? But my uncle had told me that, these are long-term investments, but you'll make a profit eventually. But we couldn't predict that kind of future. And so things were getting so bad in Anchorage because the price of oil had collapsed down. I get what's called a paycheck and used to take it to your bank. And it was Friday. I got paid every Friday. I go to my bank. The door's locked. I'm like, what? And there's a sign on the door that says this bank is under seizure by the FDIC. Your account. I'm like, what? I was in panic mode. And then it says your account has been moved to another bank. So I go to that bank and was doing banking there. We're still in the 87, 88. And it wasn't until 89 after the oil spill that things started changing. But I wanted to say in that time frame, the other bank that my account was moved to, they sold to another financial institution because I'm not sure why. I don't think they were under seizure, but that's how bad things were getting.
And for those listening familiar with Dave Ramsey, similar kind of story. He had real estate and he was an expert in real estate. And it wasn't even that you kind of teased yourself about buying high and having to sell low, but when you have debt, sometimes it forces you to sell at inopportune times. And that's how Dave Ramsey went bankrupt. They called his loans because banks were getting really nervous and they had multiple loans out. I think he was like 27 years old. It was some kid, and thankfully they didn't call any of your loans. Well, they weren't going to because your property's worth less than what you owed on it.
And I was still making my payments.
Well, and he was too.
Right.
But again, people don't understand how debt can get you in trouble. When everything is going great, debt doesn't seem like that big of a risk. And Warren Buffett says, you don't know who's skinny dipping until the tide goes out. Well, in 2008, the tide went out again. And we saw a lot of people going bankrupt. Again, people being foreclosed on, people losing their jobs. And I just think back to when you and I started working together, like that. You'd already seen that movie before. You lived through it, and being able to have the perseverance to continue on, to stay on the path. And it was that first several years. It took, I think, 4 or 5 years, maybe not quite, but at least 3 or 4 years for your initial investment to get upright again, to cross the barrier when you started. And I remember being so frustrated for you, but you were patient. You just kept at it. And I was so excited when I finally got the call that you were going to retire. You're going to move on. Cause it was a moment that we've been working towards for a long time. And you just, like I said before, you've done so many of the little things. And I think tying this back into debt, you don't have to hit home runs. You don't have to have buying the Amazon stock at 2001 prices. You don't have to strike it rich, but just slowly chipping away at those things and not having debt allowed you to stay in the game, allowed you to continue to build what you and Kathleen were trying to create because you didn't have the liability holding you back.
Right. And I might say, I don't know if this is going to be popular, but I always drove a car that was a beater with a heater, so to speak. I never bought a car with a car payment. And I have this attitude, if I can't afford it, then I don't need to own it. And once I got out of debt it took 10 years on that 15-year note. It was May 1993. I became debt free, but I was dirt poor through 94. But and then in 95, I don't know if I've ever told you this. In 1995, where I worked, I got a 25% wage cut. It was huge. And all my coworkers were scrambling. They had to figure out how to make that up. And thank God I had just been out of debt for over a year, and I wasn't paying $1,068 anymore to the mortgage company. I was paying it to our checking account, leaving it there. Kathleen didn't have to rush out and get a job, and we had Christina at the time, and then Katie came along, our second daughter, and I was just thankful she could be home, even though I wasn't saving any money now, by paying off the home. But our world wasn't, it stunk, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Who wants a 25% wage cut? We didn't panic. We were okay. And I was thankful for a guy named Larry Burkett, who I started listening to on the radio, who gave me other principles that I started really applying and practicing. The other thing is, after I got out of debt in 93, I was very careful to not get into debt anymore. We didn't own credit cards back then, but now I have credit cards. I'm not against credit cards. If I can't pay it off, I made a commitment to ourselves. If we can't pay it off when we get the bill, then that's the time we got to not use it anymore. We have to cut it. So getting out of debt was a big deal. And then the other principle we've lived by, Kathleen and I, is always live within our means. Don't spend more than I make. And so that was kind of the gist. I'm just an average Joe. I don't have any major things to contribute that.
So there's some things that maybe feel average, but what you did was not. And there's so many people that in your shoes would have made the excuses that I don't make enough money. I don't have the opportunities that other people, I don't have the education. I don't have the background. I don't have this. I don't have that. They would focus on what they didn't have, but you focus on what you did have, and you made each one of those things matter. Greg, did you have?
Yeah. How many years did you and Kathleen save her income?
That was only for about a year, because after that she became unemployed. So, but we saved $10,000. She didn't make a lot of money. She didn't make $1,000 a month, but we saved it. And then I took those funds and I paid off those high interest rate 2 pieces of property we owned. We paid those off.
So I love, I don't know if you picked up on this. You're all about using other people's money, but you're hesitant to do the 401k. So you switched from using debt as other people's money,
yes,
to using other people's money in your 401k with a match. And that worked out a lot better.
Yes.
And that's the way to use other people's money. Even if your company only matches like at 3, 4, 5%, I think Pepsi was 5, right?
Yeah, I think so.
But that might not make or break your financial future, but it's still, a lot of extra help. Because you didn't have a huge salary. Every little bit made a difference. And you were able to capture that and leverage that for a 40-year career. You made the most of what a lot of people would overlook as not being a big enough piece. I just think, the big piece to your pathway, I think, was eliminating debt early on, because it allowed you to do the small things going forward.
And I make a joke about a friend of mine. I always say there's never a payment he doesn't like, because he likes to buy things. But to me, I don't want a thing I don't want to be a slave to a thing like a car. I want the car to bring me to work, because I want to prepare for the future. I don't want to be going to work to pay for the car that's bringing me to work. And that kind of thing always frustrated me if I was in the reverse situation.
Well, it's hard to build your future when you're always paying for your past. And that's what debt is.
Well said. Well said.
Well, Chris, I appreciate your persistence and being an example that you've been. And I do want to reiterate, like, maybe there were some circumstances where you feel like you were average, but you took the path less traveled. You took the narrow path, and you did it going against the grain. I mean, there's a lot of people that I'm sure thought, why is somebody like that doing that? Or, why doesn't his wife work outside the home? Like, there's a lot of people question and criticize, but I wanted to just praise you, and also encourage others that regardless of your financial circumstances, there's a lot that you can do, and not to focus on what you can't do. And Chris, my favorite part is just how generous you've been along the way. So money was not something that you used only to make your circumstances better. I've seen you bless people along the way for decades, and you've been a steward, been a very faithful steward. And I've been proud to watch that happen.
Oh, well, thank you. I guess I never thought of it that way. I don't know. Live on 80, give 10% away, and the other 10 save if you can.
It seems so simple, but to do it for decades and decades, it's a lot of hard work, a lot of persistence.
I will say I am so grateful that I really didn't think I could retire at 59 years old, but you helped me see that. My bride has been very grateful because we were able to take care of her parents and in their last years. And so I'm just thankful. It's real freeing, I guess. I have, I don't know. I've been really grateful these last few years. Just, it sounds simplistic, but I've sit down at the breakfast table and I might be eating 2 eggs with 2 toasts and a cup of coffee. And I'm just thanking God, like, man, I can't believe I'm here, but it's so nice. It is so nice.
Well, I appreciate your example, Chris, and thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Blue Collar Millionaire Show. We hope this episode has been inspiring and beneficial to you. If you want help on your journey to financial freedom, reach out to us at veritasalaska.com. We'd love to sit down over a cup of coffee with you, either here in our office or virtually, and get to know you and your needs. And though this podcast is free of charge, we do ask that you please do us 2 quick favors. If you enjoyed the episode, give our pod a great rating on iTunes or whatever podcast platform you use, and also give us a follow on Instagram. We hope you have a wonderful day filled with gratitude and intentionality. God bless.
The information expressed is for general information only and is not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations for any individual. It is suggested that you consult your financial professional, attorney, or tax advisor with regard to your individual situation. Hypothetical investment results are for illustrative purposes only and should not be deemed a representation of future results.